Renewed and revitalised, is that a sort of term that you would agree with?
Well, certainly we are through the worst period in the relationship. We went through this period of many years when we had 4+ years of economic coercion from China and a period of diplomatic deep freeze without the kind of high-level political engagement that we were accustomed to before. And at the very least, we're getting to the end of that economic coercion campaign. It looks like the final trade restrictions on red meat and lobster will come off in the coming weeks. And with this leader-level visit to Australia, we've had the first leader-level visit from China to Australia in more than 7 years. So it's a question as to what the future holds, but at the very least, this marks the end of the period of most tumult and drama and tension in the relationship over recent years.
Yeah, we're watching a very, warm and welcoming handshake from the Prime Minister. What was quite interesting too is that defence talks were flagged to try and avoid military clashes that we have seen between the two countries. Do you think China is sincere about properly monitoring those things, given their ambitions in the region?
Look, this is a really fascinating question. I think the short answer to that is probably not. We've seen in recent years this concerted long-term effort on the part of the PLA to issue warnings to aircraft and vessels from foreign militaries across vast areas of land and sea proximate to China. And I don't expect that that approach from Beijing will shift. There'll still be unsafe and unprofessional encounters between the PLA and the Australian military and other regional militaries. Having said that, having additional lines of communication between the Chinese military and other regional militaries is probably no bad thing. But the details of this agreement are pretty hazy. It seems unclear what it precisely entails, particularly because we already have regular military engagement between the ADF and the PLA on an annual basis. So it's not obvious what this entails. It may well be that there is going to be put in place some kind of more immediate mechanism for the ADF to contact the PLA in instances of unsafe and unprofessional conduct, but it's still very TBC at this stage.
Indeed. Well, there were still protesters out today in Canberra. There was also sensitivity with local embassy staff seemingly trying to block a camera from filming Cheng Lei, who we know, of course, was the Australian journalist who had been detained in Beijing. You know, that's tricky for Australia to manage those kind of issues that China does not take kindly to.
Yeah, look, it, I think highlights the way in which, even though the relationship is getting more positive and there are a lot of smiles and a lot of handshakes and there's some furry and cuddly moments with the pandas, the reality is that Australia and China are divided by different national interests and ultimately different values, in that what we saw today with this effort on the part of two Chinese officials to ensure that the camera didn't shoot Cheng Lei proximate to the Chinese Premier was an indication of just the extent to which the Chinese government still seeks to exert control at all times and doesn't want free and open discussion and wants to be able to control the information environment. And we saw that as well with the protests happening outside Parliament House. The protests from members of the Hong Kong community, Uyghur community, Tibetan community, they were a wonderful demonstration of freedom of expression and freedom of speech in Australia. But of course, the Chinese embassy sought to have counter-protests there as well, and seemingly bankrolled efforts on the part of nationalistic supporters of the Chinese government to drown out those protesters criticizing the Chinese government. So notwithstanding all this positivity, there are still these deep-seated fissures between Australia and China that are going to create ongoing tension now and in the future.
Yeah. Ben, of course, we also know that China is very dogged in its ambitions too with getting the sort of business interests that it wants from Australia. They're off to WA now, where they're eyeing off our reserves of important rare earth minerals. You know, the Foreign Investment Review Board has forced the divestment of Chinese investors, but China really wants access to these minerals. How should Australia, do you think, be managing this?
Yeah, look, this is another fascinating pointy issue in the Australia-China bilateral relationship. Over the course of the Albanese government's tenure, they've adopted a softer tone on China and tried to rehabilitate that bilateral relationship, but they've still been relatively tough on a number of key issues. And one of those issues is critical minerals, where over the course of the last couple of years, we've had two significant rejections of investments from the Chinese government in Australian critical minerals miners, one in rare earth elements and one in lithium. And as you mentioned, we've seen a divestment order just recently as well. And so it's fairly clear that Canberra has a strong view that Chinese capital is simply not welcome in Australia's critical minerals miners. And that's a function of the fact that in partnership with the United States and Japan and a whole host of like-minded countries, Australia is in the business of trying to create China-free global supply chains for critical minerals. And that means effectively rebuffing China's efforts to invest in that sector. But of course, critical minerals are a priority for China. Lithium, for example, is such a key input into the manufacture of lithium-ion batteries and the Chinese electric vehicle industry in general. And so China will keep on pushing on that door, but it seems as if the Albanese government is going to be firm on that. And so again, that is going to be another significant long-term source of bilateral tension as Australia rebuffs those investments and China tries to push in more and more.
Yeah, differences and coming together, an interesting visit. Good to have you on. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Great to be with you.